Welcome to the orientation for the Student Unmanned Aerial Systems competition. In this presentation, we'll go through the key things you need to know before attending the on-site event. First, the competition staff. The staff can be identified through the SUAS shirts. There are three colors of shirts that you will see: yellow for the leads, blue for the judges, and green for the logistics. At the competition, you may want to identify these four people in order to ask questions. Phil, Veronique, Tom, and Troy are best to answer questions about things like the rules, what to expect, or to help you through other logistical challenges. Now let's talk about day one of the event. On day one, you will arrive and first check in. This is where you will hand in paperwork, receive badges, and enter the facility. Then you will be served food, and then immediately roll into individual team photos. We will then have an on-site career fair where we get to meet sponsors and other local organizations that you may be interested in terms of career opportunities or other systems you can take a look at. We'll then get together for a group photo followed by lunch, and then we will go into safety inspections. Arrival will start at 7 a.m. and run until 8 a.m. You will need to arrive at the St. Mary's County Regional Airport. Each team will be given a specific arrival window via the Google Groups listserv, so via email, in order to stagger arrivals so that we do not have long lines forming and so that we can process everyone on time. If you fail to arrive in this window, you may be denied entry, and if you decide to leave later, you may be denied re-entry. Whether or not we will allow re-entry will depend on our staffing at the event. At check-in, you will need to fill out forms. You will have the option to purchase additional meal tickets, and you will have to provide signed waivers for all attendees. And remember, don't forget sunblock and insect repellent. As you arrive, you will come down Airport Road towards the airport. As you arrive, you will park in one of the designated lots, and then you will head to the gate for a badge check. This is where check-in and processing of forms will happen, after which you will receive a badge, and that badge will give you entrance through the gate. After that point, you will be in the pit area of the competition. In order to check in, you will need the following. First, your team captain must be present. Second, you will need signed waivers for all attendees. And finally, we will need to get updated contact information for the team captain and advisor so that we can contact you if needed. At check-in, you will receive your badges, which will give you access to the event. You'll receive your meal tickets for food, and if we are distributing swag at the event, we will give it to you then as well. The badges will be distributed at check-in, and you must have your badge in order to gain entry. If you lose or forget the badge, you'll be denied entry and no extras will be given out. Remember, outside of the arrival window, the gate may close to entry and re-entry. Within the pit area, there are very specific permitted areas. You must stay within this bounding box while at the event, unless escorted by competition staff. In particular, you are not allowed to enter the airport terminal. Only competition staff may be in the terminal. And secondarily, you may not cross this line without being escorted by competition staff. If you are found outside of the permitted area, you will be disqualified and removed from the event. The pits are where you will set up for the event. It's where you will unpack your equipment, prepare your vehicle, and otherwise get ready to compete. There will be tents for shade and for shelter from weather. You'll have a table and chairs designated for your team. And in general, you will unload from the parking lot and carry the equipment into your pit area. While in the pit, you are permitted to emit RF, so you can power up your systems, you can check communications, except you are not allowed to perform intentional interference with any other team. You're also permitted to power up the motors and spin them up, but you're not allowed to have the propellers attached. And finally, while in the pits, you're not allowed to fly your air vehicle. The competition is held on an active airfield, which operates as an airport when not during the event. Any objects and debris must be cleared so that they do not interfere with full-size aircraft that will be in the area after the event. Any object or debris must be cleaned up, but if they are left anywhere on the airfield, teams will be subject to penalties and disqualification. In the event of a crash, we will need to pause the event and walk the field to clear it of debris. Your pit area must also remain clear of debris, and you must be mindful of wind carrying that debris out of the pits. Judges will regularly walk the pits and assess penalties to teams not policing their debris. Food and drinks will be distributed at the event. Food will require tickets, which are provided at check-in based on registration. Extra tickets will be available for purchase at check-in for guests who are not covered by the registration fee. Breakfast and lunch will be served each day, and dinner will be served at the awards ceremony. There will also be water bottles in coolers on site dispersed throughout the area. Note, if you leave to get food off-site, you may be denied re-entry upon returning to the facility. For that reason, we recommend bringing additional food and drinks so that you are satisfied during the event without having to leave. Next, there will be individual team photos. This will start approximately at 9 a.m. and will be the first thing after arriving and unpacking. We will also take additional photos and videos throughout the event. Next up will be the career fair. Here you will get to meet potential employers and sponsors of the competition. We recommend bringing a printed resume because past on-site competition events have resulted in interviews that have later resulted in job offers. And as part of this, you'll get to learn about cutting-edge technology and development. And new this year, we'll have this live at the airfield tents. Following the career fair, we will have the group photo. We will start preparing to assemble for the event around 11 a.m., and we will take the photo by drone. Please note we will not wait for teams. If you are not present, the photo will be taken without you. Similarly, if you are not prepared to take the photo, for example, you're not paying attention, the photo will happen whether you are ready or not. Then we will move on to safety inspections. Those will start approximately at noon after the group photo and lunch. The inspector will meet you at your assigned table and review your system for readiness. You will need to be prepared to demonstrate the system meets the requirements when the judge arrives at your table. If you're not there or you're not ready, or a judge identifies issues with your vehicle, you will be moved to the back of the queue and the inspector will come back later. Note, please do not attach the propellers, but have them with you. The judges will use the motors and spin them up to verify the loss of communication flight termination. And for that, they will have the motors spin without the propellers. Later, they will ask you to attach the propellers to verify that those are attached securely. You are required to pass safety inspection by 5 p.m., and if you have not passed inspection by that point, you risk disqualification. Once you pass inspection, and that is confirmed by the judge, you are free to leave for the day. Now we'll go through the checklist for safety inspection. The safety pilot is required to complete the FAA Trust exam and provide a certificate of completion at the safety inspection and the flight line. The vehicle must be registered, and you must have a certificate of registration, and the ID must be on an external surface of the aircraft. The judges will also verify that it's a single aircraft, heavier than air, with no tethers and up to 55 pounds in weight. They'll also verify that you can power the system without requiring personnel near the prop arc. This is to ensure safety that an accidental power-up and spin-up of motors will not cause personnel injury during the event. Next, they'll verify that all batteries are brightly colored and that you're not using an exotic fuel or battery. They'll then check that all fasteners either have safety wire, Loctite, or nylon nuts to ensure that these fasteners do not come loose during flight. They'll then verify that the UAS is properly configured to return to home and land during the event in the event of a communication loss. First, they'll check that it's activatable by the safety pilot and the ground station. Next, they'll check that after 30 seconds of communications loss, the aircraft must return to home or return to land. The judge will also verify that the termination point, or the return to home land point, must be a specific GPS position specified in the rules. The judges will next verify that after 3 minutes of communications loss, the aircraft automatically terminates flight. For a fixed-wing aircraft, this is throttle closed, full up elevator, full right rudder, and full aileron, and full flaps down. For a multi-rotor aircraft, this will be depowering the motors such that the propellers come to a stop, causing the aircraft to come down. The safety inspector will also verify that the home position is set properly, the flight boundary is displayed on the map, and the altitude limits are set to the airfield. Next, the inspector will verify your airdrop payload. They'll ensure that the entire payload weight is up to 5 pounds, that the payload has no way to sustain flight, for example, it will not have any means of propulsion or propellers, and that there is a mechanism with which there will be a safe landing so that human judges in the drop area are not at risk. Next, the inspector will evaluate the ground station. You will be required to show the map with the flight boundaries and the UAS position. You will need to show the speed in knots indicated airspeed or ground speed in knots. The altitude must be displayed in feet MSL, so that's feet above mean sea level. They will verify that all safety functionality is operated on site and not through a remote connection. And finally, that you are prepared to transport to the flight line via competition-provided flatbed trailers. That concludes day 1. Now we'll go through day 2. Please note that there is a primary day intended to fly, which would be Wednesday, but in the event of rain or other weather, we may delay this to Thursday. On day 2, you will arrive and set up similar to day 1, except it will start at 6 a.m. and end at 6:45. Similar to last time, you will receive an arrival window through the Google Groups email listserv. The competition will then immediately roll into mission demonstrations starting at 7 a.m. During the mission demonstrations, both breakfast and lunch will be served. Following mission demonstrations, we will clean up the facility to prepare for the awards ceremony. We will then have the awards ceremony and then clean up the entire facility to finish the competition. For the order of team demonstrations, we will first have evaluated all deliverables submitted to date, and those will be scored. For example, all presentations will be evaluated, scored, and ranked to produce an initial ranking of teams. We will then fly the teams in the order of their initial ranking, but the top 5 teams will be randomly shuffled. Teams will not be notified of the flight order in advance. They must be on site and ready to go. Judges will attempt to fly as many of the teams as possible, but should time run out, for example due to weather delays, teams with the lowest initial ranking may not have the opportunity to fly. So the better you perform in your presentation, the better your chances of having an opportunity to fly. All these details are defined in the rules well ahead of registration. You will be given 5 minutes warning at your pit table that it is time to begin loading for transport to the flight line. If you miss the notification at your pit table, you may lose the opportunity to fly. This is very important because in the past, teams have wandered off, not left a representative at their table, missed the notification, and then missed the opportunity to fly at the competition. Similarly, if you're not ready to compete, you will also miss your opportunity to compete. You will then load your equipment and people onto trailers for the transport to the flight line. You can see that up here. For example, the vehicle and people are loaded onto these flatbed trailers and hauled to the flight line by competition staff. New this year, teams are no longer allowed to bring their own vehicle or their own trailer to the flight line. All teams must be transported via the competition flatbed trailers. Once you arrive on the flight line, you'll begin unloading into the flight line tent, which you see here, which represent these tents and tables. This is the structure of the flight line, tents, and runways. There are two runways, runway 1 and runway 3, which are dedicated to horizontal takeoff and landing. In the center, there is one dedicated to vertical takeoff and landing. Teams which perform vertical takeoff and landing may be assigned to runway 1, 2, or 3 because they all three will support vertical takeoff and landing. But if you are a vehicle which horizontally takes off and landing, you will only be assigned to runway 1 or runway 3. Between the runways, there is at least a 200 feet buffer for safety. The tents are then placed back from the runway to ensure that they are clear of the runway, also, once again, for safety. Each set of tents will have multiple tents so that teams can simultaneously one be on setup, one be on mission, and one undergoing teardown. So you would tend to have 3 to 4 tents at least per runway. Runways for horizontal takeoff and landing will be at least 70 feet by 600 feet. So this will be the 600 feet by the 70 feet. Vertical takeoff and landing locations will be 70 feet by 75 feet. And aircraft which vertically take off and land may be assigned to a horizontally take off and land runway. You can also opt to take off and land in the grass area, but only on the north side of the runway. So this grass area over here. And you must take off in a direction that parallels the runway. So you must take off this way or this way. You cannot take off perpendicular to the runway. Additionally, you cannot be below 75 feet above ground level, so 75 feet AGL, when you're over another team's runway or you are considered out of bounds and your mission is terminated. Here's the structure of your mission demonstration. After you arrive on the flight line and unload into the tent, you will be given 15 minutes to set up. The clock will start immediately once you've unloaded and once you've received a tent, power, and a mission details printout. In the last 5 minutes of setup, you will be required to give a briefing to the judges. Once it is your turn to occupy the runway, you will then be given 30 minutes to perform a mission demonstration. The clock will start once you're given access to the airspace and the runway. The clock will end only once you relinquish access to the airspace and runway, so once your vehicle is on the ground and cleared. In the event of a crash or other incident which requires foreign object debris to be recovered, that will be considered blocking the airspace or runway. And finally, you'll have 10 minutes to tear down your system, and this clock will end once you're ready to load the UTV and clear the tents. Setup time is 15 minutes. You will be unloaded into a dedicated tent, which will have a table and chairs. You will receive a power cord. Please note that this will be a single plug, and you may want to bring an extension or bring a power strip in order to plug in multiple devices. You will then receive runway-specific printouts with mission details. So for example, depending on which runway you are on, you will get different sets of waypoints. And then finally, in the last 5 minutes, you must give your pre-mission brief, which is a summary of your team's plan, identification of the safety pilot and GCS operator, and verification of requirements, for example, that your GCS is showing the display elements. By the end of setup, you must identify the operators who will run your mission. Per the rules, the competition team is the set of people who come to the flight line and represent your team and can be up to 8 people. The competition team can assist with setup and teardown of the system, but only the operators can operate the system during the mission. The operators are a subset of the competition team, so up to 8 people, and they will actually operate the UAS and perform the mission. You are required to have a safety pilot and a GCS operator individuals who cannot hold any other roles. In the event that they attempt to hold another role while performing the mission will be terminated. Once again, you must identify operators by the end of setup time, because operators are a scored element of the mission. So the fewer people you use at competition, the more autonomous your system is, the more points you receive. Competition team members that aren't an operator can only spectate from behind the tents while running the mission. Similarly, the advisor can spectate at the flight line, but cannot help in any way. Spectators must be silent and provide no verbal assistance. In the event they do, the violation of the rules will yield a mission termination. The mission flight boundary must be displayed on your ground control station. That is the red bounding box showed here that runs around the airport. You also must verify that your altitude bounds are set to 75 feet above ground level to 400 feet above ground level, which is the equivalent of 217 feet mean sea level or 542 feet mean sea level. Please note that the altitude bounds may be different than the airfield that you test on at home. Teams that forget to reconfigure that may cause their aircraft to crash when it attempts to fly lower than the altitude of the airport, or may attempt to climb too high when they try to climb up to the altitude of their home airport. Pro tips. Don't forget to set the altitude bounds based on the competition airfield. If you leave it set for your home airfield, your aircraft may attempt to crash itself in order to get to the altitude bounds of your home airfield. Don't forget to set the return to home position, also based on the competition airfield. If you leave it to the home airfield and it attempts to return to home, it may fly off the airport to another destination. You should also consider the waypoint settings in terms of under and overshoot and the impact that will have on staying within the bounds of the mission. In some cases, this is an autopilot setting, but you should be cognizant of this when planning your waypoint path. And you may want to consider additional waypoints in addition to the ones required by the competition in order to structure the turn and the direction of the turn such that the aircraft will stay in bounds. Here's the checklist that will be applied at setup time. You will need to identify your safety pilot, provide the FAA Trust Certificate of Completion, identify the number of operators, which must be a number between 2 and 8. You must verify that the safety pilot and GCS operator have dedicated roles. You must give your pre-mission brief, and you are given only up to 15 minutes after receiving your tent, table, power, and mission printout. For the GCS judge, they will verify which is the GCS operator. They will ensure they were provided the mission details printout, and they will verify the GCS display shows the flight boundaries, the UAS, the altitude in MSL feet, and the speed in either knots indicated airspeed or knots ground speed. Some pro tips for setup. Set up as much as possible in the pits before you're ever transported to the flight line. Ideally, everything should be fully assembled, fully connected, and just ready for power on. Some of the more advanced teams will actually power on their systems in the pits, switch to from hardline power to battery backup power until they get to the flight line, then reconnect the utility power to the system to charge up the batteries and keep it from draining the batteries. And then only once the mission is released and you're ready to take the airspace do they disconnect and go straight to battery power for the mission. So you should consider how much you can set up as possible in the pits before transportation to the flight line so you're maximally ready. Once you're on the flight line, you should fully verify the UAS is ready before the end of setup. So within the 15 minutes, you should verify communications are running, you can do motor run-up tests, you can check your configurations, and this will ensure that by the end of setup time, you've identified and mitigated any issues that may come up. If you're going to energize your motors or actuators, this must be done in a safe manner. The vehicle must be in a safe area, and no humans can enter the prop arc. This all enables you to detect and mitigate issues before the end of setup before you will go into your mission time and either need to use a timeout or run out of mission time entirely. After the end of setup, you should aim to put the vehicle on the runway and take off within the first minute. A timeout is only allowed once to stop the mission clock. It costs a penalty equal to 20% of the timeline points. It can only be taken at the flight line, after the mission clock starts, and before the vehicle captures its first waypoint. The timeout will last at least 10 minutes, but may be longer if there are other vehicles that occupy the airspace. As a pro tip, we recommend taking the timeout immediately if you have an issue that takes more than a minute to resolve. In practice, we see that most teams that take more than a minute to resolve the issue ultimately end up needing to take a timeout in order to resolve it. The safety pilot must always comply with FAA rules. They must always have unaided visual line of sight to the vehicle. This means that you are not allowed to use a first-person view setup without an additional safety pilot at the competition flight line. The safety pilot is required to take manual control at the first sight of problems, and they must communicate to the lead judge whenever they transition between automatic control and manual control. For takeoff and landing, the team must stay above 75 feet ground level whenever greater than 200 feet from the runway. So as we said before, runways will have a buffer of at least 200 feet before other runways or other obstacles. So when greater than 200 feet, the vehicle must stay above 75 feet in order to not occupy the other team's airspace or run into another obstacle. If you go below 75 feet AGL when over another runway, the mission is terminated. You also must go above 75 feet AGL within the first 10 minutes of your mission demonstration, or your mission will be terminated. Additionally, takeoff and landing can be manual or autonomous. There is no point distinction, and you are not required to come back and land if you take off manually and then transition to autonomous flight. Besides takeoff and landing, the rest of your flight must be autonomous. In the event you are required to take over to manual flight, you are required to return to land, and if you take off again, you are required to refly the waypoints on every takeoff. If you go out of bounds, that will terminate your mission. During the competition, there will be up to 3 teams flying at the same time, and this will require you to have a form of obstacle avoidance. In the event things fall off the aircraft in an unplanned way during flight, you will receive a penalty for things falling off the aircraft. You will also receive a penalty if you crash, and additionally, you will have timeline penalties if that requires a foreign object debris recovery. You will also have a penalty if you have a collision with another vehicle, unless that collision occurs in your runway airspace, or that other vehicle is violating your team's airspace. In all cases where there is things falling off the aircraft, a crash, or a collision, the judges may opt to terminate the mission if it is deemed an unsafe condition to continue. Waypoints must be flown immediately after each takeoff before attempting other tasks. If you attempt another task before completing the waypoints, no points will be given to that task. If you return to land for any reason, whether to swap batteries, because you were required to after a manual takeover, or any other reason you return to land, you must immediately refly waypoints after the next takeoff. The waypoint sequence can be up to 12 miles in length, may require a turn radius of 150 feet, and may require you to have a max climb or descent rate of 20 degrees. On the right here, you see the waypoint path from SUAS 2022, which was a looped path requiring you to go around multiple times with changes in altitude based on the lap you have taken. Once you've completed the waypoints, you may attempt the object detection, localization, and classification task, and the airdrop task. There will be 4 standard objects represented by an alphanumeric and a shape, and 1 emergent object represented by a mannequin. The objects, whether standard or emergent, will mark your drop locations. You will be required to drop objects or water bottles labeled with the associated object you need to drop it on. For example, here you'll see this water bottle is labeled with a white A on a blue triangle. And that means you need to identify the ODLC, which is a white A on a blue triangle, and drop this water bottle on that location. A drop is considered successful only if the drop object lands safely, gently, and undamaged within 15 feet of the correct ODLC object. The airdrop boundary is where all ODLCs will be located. This boundary is given in the rules, and you should use this area to search for the different ODLCs. In general, the airport is closed during the mission demonstration, and large X's will mark the runway closed. And competition staff, including the airport, will have radios with which to communicate with other aircraft in the airspace. That being said, medical and law enforcement emergency flights may still need to take off and land at the airport during the event. Additionally, there may be uncooperative aircraft that may still attempt to land despite the closed indicators and the communication over the airways. For this reason, we selected midweek for the missions to try to minimize disruption based on the historical frequency of such events at the airport. However, in the event that traffic enters the airspace, the mission will be paused, we will stop the mission clock, the UAS will be required to land immediately, and we will wait for the airspace to clear. During this time, the vehicle will be given at least 5 minutes to refuel, but you are not allowed to otherwise modify the aircraft or process data. Once the airspace has been cleared, you will be allowed to take off and return to the position where the pause occurred, and once you reach that position, the mission clock will resume. If your aircraft leaves bounds or is determined to be a danger to personnel, aircraft, facilities, or other things, the lead judge may inform you, the safety pilot, to manually take over and return to land. The safety pilot is required to follow these instructions by the lead judge. If the situation warrants, the lead judge may also order you to immediately terminate flight and ground your air vehicle. This may be a controlled crash in a safe location such that it does not risk people, aircraft, facilities, and other things we would not want to put at risk because of an unsafe situation. If you fail to adhere to these judge directives, you will be disqualified from the event. Safety is our first priority, and we may require you to either take over manual control or terminate flight in order to ensure safety. During the mission, we will apply the following checklists and scoring sheets. For the mission time, you are required to take off and get to 75 feet above ground level within the first 10 minutes. If you're unable to do that, the mission will be terminated. Every time you manually take over, you will be required to return to land and refly the waypoints. And if you go out of bounds, whether due to the polygon boundary or the altitude bounds, your mission will be terminated and will be required to return to land. In terms of the scoring, the lead judge will evaluate whether or not you collided with another aircraft, whether things fell off the aircraft, and whether the aircraft crashed. The lead judge will also determine whether you had a timeout, how much mission time you took, and will also coordinate any sort of air traffic mission pause. The lead judge will also receive information about how many airdrops were successful and assign an operational excellence score, which is a subjective measure of team performance, including professionalism, communication, reactions, and safety. The ground control station judge will perform a few other tasks. They will also verify that successful takeoff occurs to 75 feet above ground level within the first 10 minutes. Keep in mind, This means that the GCS judge must be able to continuously see the altitude of the aircraft from a display in order to evaluate that. They also need to verify that you flew the waypoints after each takeoff before other tasks. This means they must be able to see where the aircraft is relative to waypoints as the aircraft is flying them. The GCS judge will also evaluate out of bounds and must be able to see the location of the aircraft and the location of the boundaries and the altitude to ensure that the UAS is within bounds at all times. In the event the GCS judge is unable to see any of these things because the display, for example, is incomplete or the display is not accessible to the judge at the time, under the discretion of the judge, they may terminate your mission. So please be sure to make sure these things are visible to the GCS judge at all times. The GCS judge will also assist in coordinating any air traffic mission pause by noting where the aircraft was at the time of the pause. All of these inputs will be then summarized into the mission scoring input sheet, including the mission time, the number of operators, the number of successful airdrops, the operational excellence score, and then whether you used the timeout, had things fall off the aircraft, crashed, or had a collision. Once your mission is complete and you've relinquished the airspace so that another team can launch, your mission clock will stop. Teams will then be given 10 minutes to pack up and load onto the UTV trailers. You must ensure your tent is clean and clear of any debris, and then you will be transported back to the pits. That being said, do not pack away your aircraft or the equipment into your cars yet. At the end of the event, if there is extra time, then the top 5 teams, by total score inclusive of the first mission demonstration, may have the opportunity to fly a second mission in random flight order. You will have 5 minutes notice to load the UTVs similar to before, but if you aren't ready, you will forfeit this opportunity. The better of the 2 demonstrations will count. Following the mission demonstrations, we will clean up the pits. Once all the flights are completed, including the second round demonstration, everyone will clean the pits. The team's UAS, equipment, and all other material will be packed into your team's motor vehicles. We will then move any motor vehicles that were in the area out of the pit area and into the parking area. If there are any debris left in a team's pit area, a penalty will be assessed. We will then prepare the area for the dinner and the awards ceremony. The awards ceremony will occur on site at the pits this year, and that is new for 2023. We will start once the flights and the cleanup are complete, but not necessarily at a set time, so please do not be off site and miss it. We will serve dinner. We will have a presentation recapping the events, and then we will have the presentation of rankings and awards. At the end of the awards ceremony, you should have payment information available so that we can create checks, and we will need to know who that check will be payable to. And then we will conclude the event and clean up again. On the right here, you see the awards that were presented at the 2022 competition. And finally, we will clean up the airport after the awards ceremony, leaving it in an as good or better situation than when we first arrived at the event. We will move all the tables and chairs to a staging area for pickup. We will clear all debris and trash, and we will leave the airport facilities. And that will conclude the competition. We look forward to seeing you at SUAS 2023.